This is Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, brought to you by the Iowa Soybean Association, your daily recap of the information that affects Iowa's farmers, producers, and consumers, right here in the heart of the heartland. With reports from our award-winning broadcast team of Dustin Hoffman, Riley Smith, and Mark Magnuson. Now, from the IARN studios in Des Moines, here's Dustin Hoffman.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Dustin Huffman. Today is Wednesday, May the 22nd, 2024. We're so glad you could join us here today. Later on in the program, I'm going to be talking with Kaitlynn Glover. She's Executive Director of the Public Lands Council and heads up the NCBA's team on environmental concerns and natural resources. But first, let's go ahead and take a look at the markets. It's time now for the Ag Matters PM Closing Market Summary, your source for market analysis and settlement prices from the day's trade in Chicago, courtesy of the folks at agmarket.net. Well, we're at the end of another trading day, and it's time to talk with Tyler Schau of agmarket.net. Tyler, we started out pretty strong in the markets. Were we able to hold that together on the grain side?
Corn and beans were able to kind of stay positive on the day. Wheat was not able to hold those overnight gains and is actually going to close down on the day. It's been kind of a common theme, really, for the last few weeks, where wheat trades very strong in the overnight, and then as we come into the morning session, with the exception of the last 2 days, we kind of fall off and pull way back off of those highs, and we're going to close down here 3 or 4 cents in Chicago and a couple cents in Kansas City today again.
So asking about that wheat situation, we know that a lot of the overnight trade is done by computers and algorithms, and it's human interpretation that does and changes things around during the day trade. What is it that the computers have been seeing that the human capacity has had to change all those days?
It's following a lot of the weather in the Black Sea region. So there's parts of Russia that are dry that also had to deal with some freezing temperatures a couple weeks back. Ukraine has also got dryness settling in, and so a lot of it is just paying attention to these models that come out overnight when people aren't awake, and then those models change, and then also the humans get behind the computers and decide maybe the algorithms pushed it too far to one side or the other, and then that's when you see this sell-off occur during the daytime.
Now, we have been seeing a lot of rain in parts of the Corn Belt. We have been talking about drought for so long. Now we're talking about flash flooding and replants because of wet spots, and even replants of replants. How much is the market paying attention to some of this, especially when we know crop insurance deadlines are starting to creep up in some parts of the Corn Belt?
The market's paying attention. I was talking to a guy today that's been in the commercial brokerage business for many, many years, and one of his comments was, "I've never made money buying corn when it's raining," and so I know that for the producers, it's frustrating to be sitting out there. Maybe you got some crop you still haven't got in the field. Maybe you're going to have to look at some replant. But the old adage holds true: rain makes grain, and there's a lot of places have been getting a lot of it here, and it's welcome. You got places in Nebraska and Western Iowa that have gone almost 3 years without significant rainfall events, and they're starting to get some. So it's definitely changing that drought monitor. I think that's going to look a lot different here over the next couple of weeks, and then it's also changing that subsoil moisture. So, I mean, our opinion as of right now is, longer term, it's beneficial. Yeah, there'll be some headaches. There might be some replant issues, but don't forget that that's what's needed to make a crop.
And before we switch over to livestock, we were talking about that. We've had a few places in Iowa that have gotten more rain in the last week than they got all of last year. So we definitely understand that. And you being a native Iowan, I'm sure you've heard all those stories too about how things are going that way.
Yeah, I've got some family down there up in the Waterloo area where they've gotten 5-6 inches of rain. We've got an office down in Winterset. One of our brokers down there told us today, I think in the month of May, he's had like 13 3/4 inches of rain. So things have really changed in some areas over the last few months.
So as we said, livestock coming up. We know cattle and hogs. Cattle had a good day yesterday. Hogs a little bit less of a good day yesterday. How did things pan out today for both those proteins?
Cattle finally got over the resistance. If you look at the August feeder chart, 260 was awfully stiff resistance. There was I believe the 100-day moving average was right above at that level. Really, for the last 4 trading days, we've went up to that 260 level and just couldn't get through it. Got over it right away this morning, pushed higher. We're going to close up $3 on the August contract. Your November feeders are up about $2.50, so back over that 260 mark as well. So some bullish momentum. There's a cattle on feed report comes out Friday. The expectation of it is to be somewhat friendly to the cattle market, so we'll kind of have to wait and see what we hear on Friday. Hogs have just really been struggling since went up and hit those 110 areas there over the last few months. The technicals have turned negative. Fundamentals don't look all that great. So I would expect hogs to remain under pressure for the near term.
All right. Well, if folks want to talk about some of their market strategies, maybe put the finishing touches on what they're going to market ahead of this 24 season for the fall, what's the best way for them to get in touch with agmarket.net?
Look us up online, agmarket.net. There's a contact page. You can look up, see if there's a broker in your area, and reach out and give us a call.
All right. Well, Tyler, thanks so much for the insight. We'll talk to you again next week.
You bet. Take care, Dustin.
That again was Tyler Schau of agmarket.net. Let's go ahead and take a look at the closing numbers. That comes to us on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network market screen. At the close, July corn up 3 1/4 at 461 1/4. Soybeans up a dime at 12.46 1/4. Soybean meal up $5.90 at 378.20 per ton. Soy oil up 7 cents at 45.88. Chicago wheat down 4 1/2 at 6.93 even. Kansas wheat down 2 at 6.99 1/2. Minneapolis spring wheat down 2 1/4 at 7.36 1/2. Oats up 4 1/4 at 3.66 1/4. On the Merc Live, cattle up $1.20 at 184.17. Feeders up $3.07 at 262.90. Lean hogs down $1 at 95.40. Pork cutouts unchanged at 103.50. And Class 3 milk down 48 cents at $20. And that's been our closing market recap. We're going to take a short break and hear from our sponsor, the Iowa Soybean Association and the Soy Checkoff. When we come back, we talk with Kaitlynn Glover of the NCBA. This is Ag Matters PM.
Iowa Soybean Association is driven to deliver for Iowa's 40,000 soybean farmers. We're proud to provide objective agronomic research, a helping hand with soil and water stewardship, and timely industry news powered by the Soybean Checkoff. Learn more at iasoybeans.com.
Welcome back to AMPM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Dustin Huffman. Well, the Endangered Species Act is a well-meaning piece of legislation that many farmers get behind to help support the animals and plants and environments that need the support of these critical situations. But the NCBA and the Public Lands Council is worried lately, especially when it comes to species like the gray wolf and the grizzly bear, that we see the reintroduction or the protection of species that are no longer qualified to be on the endangered species list. And they're saying that that's a misuse. And of course, it all depends on who's in power at the time. Kaitlynn Glover is with the NCBA and Public Lands Council, and she talks to us about the situation. All right, we're at Washington Watch 2024, Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, talking right now with Kaitlynn Glover. She's Executive Director of Public Lands Council and NCBA Natural Resources. Kaitlynn, thanks so much for talking with us today.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so you talk a lot about the western part, which that's where Iowa is. And so talk about some of the things you guys have got going on. I know the grizzly bear, even though it's not a problem for Iowa, it's setting a precedent that could be a problem later on for producers. You want to talk about what's going on there?
That's exactly right. When we talk about the Endangered Species Act, we talk about a long history of real engagement, of wanting to conserve species, of wanting to save the really special species and places and plants across the United States. But what we've seen with species like the grizzly bear or the gray wolf really is just a misuse of the act itself. The act over time has become so adulterated and so ineffective that you see species like the wolf or the grizzly bears go on the list and then never get delisted. The Fish and Wildlife Service recently finalized 4 separate rules on the Endangered Species Act, dealing with everything from how agencies talk to each other under consultation to incidental take. So what would happen if a farmer or rancher encountered one of these animals on their operation? And what would happen if that animal was disturbed, killed, or injured, right? But when it comes to grizzly bears, we see the agency continuing to struggle with how to deal with the conflicts between ranchers and these species. In the North Cascades, not in Iowa, but our friends in the Pacific Northwest, where a lot of these cows come on really green grass, we're seeing the Fish and Wildlife Service take steps to reintroduce grizzly bears into ecosystems that already have a lot of apex predators. Whether it's mountain lions or wolves, the conflict continues to increase. And so you're right, it might not be bears coming to an Iowa plain near you, but I think your friends in Montana who are starting to see bears in cornfields and in hay fields would definitely tell you guys that the pressure is coming.
And why is it that they're introducing them to areas that we would normally not think of finding them? Usually you think of a bear in the forest, up in the mountains, somewhere like that. Why would they introduce them to areas that are not normally where they would be?
So I think one of the challenges with the Endangered Species Act is that this concept of best available science and historic range, the range changes over time. And the best available science for the agency often omits some of the things that are common sense or best available science to the general public. And so we're going to see the Fish and Wildlife Service drop these bears into ecosystems where they haven't been for many, many years, because nature informed their patterns, and the Fish and Wildlife Service is going down this inherently political path that doesn't follow the best available science.
And you mentioned the gray wolf. I came from Minnesota, so believe me, I got to hear a lot about that before I moved to Iowa. And that situation was the fact that they had already surpassed and recovered and should have been taken off the Endangered Species Act, and they weren't. And why are they allowed to remain on when there's a threshold that allows them to go on, but that threshold should say that they're back?
Well, and Dustin, I think this is the problem, right? The Endangered Species Act was really well intended, but when you see a law that it has been adulterated, it has been, sort of chipped away at over the years, you have a system that just doesn't work anymore. You can get species onto the list, but you can't get them off, no matter how successful your work has been. Whether it's in Minnesota or in the Great Lakes region or in the Northern Rocky Mountain population, or even over in the Pacific Northwest, we see healthy, thriving populations, but a mechanism that just doesn't work. Even when you hit those goals, it's not able to get those species off the list. The agency fails, the public fails, and it allows the worst actors to exploit it. That's why our work with Congress is so important, to make sure not only that we're addressing the species-specific issues, but also addressing the larger ESA challenges that really have hampered us for decades now.
And farmers and ranchers have been good about, usually when an animal is endangered, we saw it with the eagle. How do we adjust to that so we can protect them? And farmers are usually good about that. They're good stewards of the land and the environment because they know there's apex predators and they get that. But right now with the Endangered Species Act too, they're handcuffed, and that affects them. If something is attacking their cattle, they can't protect the animals. That can put them in a world of financial trouble. You'd think there would be some kind of provision to do that at the same token to protect their investments.
Well, and this is really the crux of the problem, right? When you have a law that puts the original conservationists of these ecosystems, of these landscapes, in a position where they're in an adversarial impact, when you put the farmers and ranchers on the opposite side of whatever these goals are, that's the problem of the law. That's not because the farmers and ranchers are doing anything different than they were before, but that's why a law that doesn't work, it has to be changed. These ranchers, these farmers, the ones who are engaging not only with the prey animals, hopefully not their livestock, but certainly we've seen that over time, but also with these predators, they're managing for full ecosystem impacts. And unfortunately, this particular law only looks at one specific part of an ecosystem. And so when you don't look at the full ecosystem, like farmers and ranchers do, it's not a winning prospect.
And so what is NCBA and other organizations doing to help engage both the lawmakers and the people who are sitting here thinking that farmers don't care about the grizzly bears or the wolves, to show that, hey, we're not going out and actively trying to eradicate them here. We're just looking at how do we protect our property, our animals.
Well, it's twofold, Dustin, right? So the farmers and ranchers, they've been engaged in recovery plans and conservation plans and in a lot of different conservation and recovery efforts over generations, right? There are multiple generations who have invested in these procedures. Here at NCBA, we have the full suite of options available to us as a government affairs body and office, advocacy office here in Washington, D.C. There are the legislative options, right? So later this week, on the floor of the House is going to consider the Trust the Science Act, a legislative effort that would delist gray wolves nationwide. This is one in a suite of Endangered Species Act legislative efforts that NCBA has been engaged with and supportive of over the last number of years. We also have our regulatory pieces too, right? So the Fish and Wildlife Service has been going back and forth for the last several administrations on, will they, won't they, on Section 4, Section 7, Section 10, changing things all the time, making it less predictable for our producers. NCBA has been leading the charge, making sure that those regulatory efforts, it's very clear that farmers and ranchers need predictability, they need safety, and they need the ability to defend themselves, their families, and their operations. Allow them to be the original conservationists. And unfortunately, when those two efforts aren't successful in the traditional sense, right, we have the legal options available to us as well. NCBA has been engaged with a lot of our partners in a nationwide delisting case for the last many years. With the goal for gray wolves, for example, of supporting a national delisting rule, supporting the agency in making the right call. For the larger Endangered Species Act, we've engaged in legal efforts over time as well. And so as we look at which option is the right fit for that moment in time, NCBA and our members are well poised to take advantage.
So if more farmers and ranchers want to lend their voice to these efforts, how do they do that?
So that's exactly right. As long as we have, the more stories we have, Dustin, the better we're going to be. The more engagement that we have, not only with congressional delegations at home, but with state cattlemen's associations, and then with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, that engagement is more support. That support turns into leverage that we have in Congress, and that leverage in Congress allows us to inform the agencies. Our members can be involved with all of our policy updates, engaging in our National Cattlemen's Association, regular policy updates, and engaged with our routine conventions and engagements here on Capitol Hill.
All right. Well, I thank you so much, Kaitlynn, for taking the time to visit with us today.
Thank you so much, Dustin.
And that again was Kaitlynn Glover of the NCBA and the Public Lands Council. And that brings us to the end of today's show. You can find all our content online at iowaagnet.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, X, and on our LinkedIn channel, as well as on YouTube. And you can, of course, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you're notified each time we put out a new video project. You can also check out our free 3 times a day market podcast with analysis coming free of charge to your mobile device. You can get those at the openings, the middays, and the closing markets. Those are available for subscription through Google, Amazon, Apple, Spotify, and Podbean, or you can find them online at iowaagnet.com. From the IARN studios in Des Moines, I'm Dustin Huffman. For Andy Peterson, Riley Smith, and Mark Magnuson, we thank you for watching. This has been Ag Matters PM.